Good morning and happy St. Patrick's Day to all of you who decided to tune in to hear two very accomplished, amazing people, and I welcome them, Phil Hawkey and Cynthia Kurtz, each of whom has been a city manager for the City of Pasadena. And of course, Cynthia was the first and so far only woman to hold that post. One of the reasons I was interested in talking to them, I'll explore a little bit more fully in a second, but it's just this notion that one leads and has many stakeholders. And if you can only imagine the number of stakeholders each of them had, they had several bosses. They, of course, had the mayor, but they also had council members. They had several stakeholders. They had staffs reporting to them. They had community people, some of whom are very vocal, shall we say. And they had to temper their leadership and work with each one. So without further ado, I'd like each of them to start with a brief bio, a la be brief, be brilliant, be gone, and then we'll jump right in. So let's go with Phil first. You were city manager prior to Cynthia, so tell us a little bit about you and how you got to where you are.
Well, I grew up in Ohio, went to college in Ohio, and matured in a transformative era of America back in the 1960s and 70s. I became fascinated with urban government through Cleveland. I went to college outside of Cleveland, got involved in the Carl Stokes campaign, first Black mayor of a major American city. Got my master's degree and law degree, became city administrator of Worcester, Ohio, which is a very nice center city outside of Cleveland. City manager of Kettering, just outside of Dayton, deputy city manager of Cincinnati, and then city manager of Toledo, Ohio. And then I was recruited to come to Pasadena. That was in 1990. And after 8 years in Pasadena, I went to University of La Verne as executive vice president, chief administrative officer. And then I was 15 years there, and then opened my own consulting firm in working with nonprofits and local governments.
Good for you. And Cynthia, what about you? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, first, I'd like to say that I was both the first and the second female city manager in Pasadena. So just a distinction there that not many people are able to have. Most of my career is in local government. I've had a variety of positions, from the city manager that you mentioned, and I've worked in a few cities in that role, public works director. I was an ethics advisor with John Vandekamp when he was working with the city of Vernon. I've done some other reports for cities on project management or operational issues. I was also honored to be part of a number of nonprofit organizations, one where I got to work again with Phil with National Core Affordable Housing, which is a nonprofit organization that builds affordable housing. Also worked for 7 years for the San Gabriel Valley Economic Partnership, which works on bringing jobs and job training into the San Gabriel Valley, and 1 year with the One Arroyo Foundation, where I was assisting them in finding some more permanent leadership, an organization I've found to be really doing wonderful work here in Pasadena. I think, though, the split between the nonprofit and the public has given me really a perspective on what are the difference in management that you need to have, and what are the different styles between nonprofit and public leadership. And maybe we'll get into some of those distinctions as we go along in our conversation. But thank you for inviting me. And I'm really honored to be talking to two people who I think are some of the best leaders I've ever known.
Oh, well, very kind of you, Cynthia. And while I have you, let's take a little bit of a deeper dive. Why, Cynthia Kurtz, why did you move into government? And I know, just being a resident of Pasadena, that you had different positions at Pasadena, and what compelled you or propelled you into the city manager position, which, by the way, I don't think that's the case for men. I think, as Phil's example of being hired from the outside, it just occurred to me. Obviously, people knew you were tried and true, but tell us about that.
So, well, after a disastrous attempt when I went first to college to become a home interior designer, and having few months in, have to admit to myself I had no artistic ability whatsoever. I was drawn to classes in community development, and I was at Penn State. I was a Nittany Lion. And so I followed through and got my degree in community and urban planning and development. And then I went to the University of Iowa, Buckeye, where I took on transportation planning. I think what really brought me to city government, though, is that in those classes, I was learning how people like to live together. For whatever reason, we are drawn to cities. More people live in cities than live outside of cities today. And that's, I think, for a variety of reasons. But over time, we need to develop the systems, both the social systems and the physical systems, so we can live together safely. And that's museums and theaters, but it's also electric power and roads and sewer and water and all these systems that people don't think about, but allow us to live in cities. And I found that kind of interesting. So with the planning degree, I could have gone into the private sector. I was probably drawn to the public sector, though, more because my faculty members who were working full or part-time, in addition to teaching, and a lot of my colleagues that I was in school with, were going into the public sector. And I think I sort of followed them as I heard about their career choices and what they were doing. My first job was with a regional agency in Portland, Oregon. Then I went to the city of Portland to work in their planning department. And that's where I began to be offered opportunities to manage people. And I liked that, not so much so I could tell people what to do, although that is satisfying sometimes. But because I began to realize how much more you could get done in teams and how much better your work was in teams. When you had a group of people trying to accomplish the same mission or working on the same thing. And quite frankly, it was more fun to work in teams. And so I just enjoyed the management side as much as I did the substantive side of planning.
Well, that is pretty amazing, because one of my bugaboos, and I know, like you, I was the first woman in many positions in corporations. And usually people get promoted, at least in the private sector, if they're good individual contributors. But managing, motivating, and working in teams, all of that is a whole different skill set. And it's counterintuitive to a lot of people. I mean, frankly, in my case, having been, a practicing employment lawyer and at the time a mother of two little young kids, I kind of took those two aspects and figured out how to manage. But it wasn't fun at first. In fact, it was pretty awful. Okay, Phil, what about you? You
Well, as I
talked a
said,
lot about, by the way, I was really glad to hear like you, as a child, mostly, we say 60s, but it's mostly the 70s,
yes.
that you took those values with you. And I know you still have them today, unlike many baby boomers who we probably know who were kind of driven by money and forgot about helping others, but go for it.
Well, that's right. Trying to make the world better was the environment I grew up in and really took hold in my value system. But also, I admit that I had the opportunity to be a city administrator when I was age 29, and I liked the idea of having more direct responsibility than I would have been able to get in the private sector or nonprofit. To have the responsibility, to have an impact on a wide community, and to be able to make decisions and work with teams and the organization, and to see the impact in neighborhoods on people's lives, that gave me a lot of fulfillment. And so as I went through my career, I really was going into a more complex urban community. I was fascinated. And I have to admit that back in the day, there was a TV show, Hill Street Blues. And that kind of influenced my decision to go to Cincinnati to be a part of difficult urban problems and see what positive benefit I could make.
By the way, you do know that one of the writers on Hill Street Blues is a Pasadenean who
Oh,
lives essentially halfway between Cynthia and Diana. First name Jim. I won't tell
Yeah.
more about him, although he and I served on the Union Station Board together and I saw him recently. Okay, so Bill, for those out there who are listening, who are considering moving into public service, city government specifically, and leadership roles. We've talked about the pros. What are the cons? Let's open up the kimono here. What are the cons?
Well, it's complex, and understanding who you're responsible to and who you serve may be different constituencies. Understanding that the role of the city manager or department head is to serve the community, and the community, of course, is diverse in itself. The community can be people, individuals. It can be neighborhood groups. It can be the business community, and they have different interests. But at the same time, you're hired by the city council that also wants to be well regarded in the community, and they're the ones that are your boss. Sometimes what you hear in the community is different than what you hear from your bosses, and because part of the role of the city manager is to give advice and guidance to the elected officials, but dealing with that potential difference of perception between that city council might have and what you hear in the community. And plus, one of the odd things of city government is that the people in the community, the residents, the businesses, even your own employees, the unions, particularly the firefighters and police officers, elect your bosses. And so you're working with people in the community who elect your bosses, who have the power to hire and fire the city manager. So it's a cyclical system. I compare that to when I went into nonprofit, private university, where it was clear I worked for the president, had a relationship with the board of trustees. Relationship with the community was important, but less important than in city government. So it was a clear line of responsibility, not so in city government.
Okay, so you mentioned your first position as a city manager. You were only 29 years old. That's a baby.
Yeah,
I
it
can't
is.
imagine that you did not confront all sorts of, I mean, was there any time when you thought, why in the heck did I do this? And I'm going to, put in a short period of time, a year or two, and then I'm going to go off and have a job that is less complex.
Well, the most important lesson I learned is to trust and rely upon the staff, the department heads, the talented people in the organization, to learn to listen. And I learned some tough lessons trying to feel out my style of management. Sometimes thinking a boss is supposed to be rigid and tough and demanding, and I made some mistakes with that, and it wasn't my true natural character. So I was artificial in that regard. But the other aspect is understanding public service. I remember distinctly working with a family that had a house, they owned a house, but in the floodplain of the city of Worcester. And of course, when it rained, his yard and sometimes his house would flood, and he and his neighbors would complain to me. And of course, one perception is, well, why'd they buy a house in the flood zone? It's their fault. They should suffer the penalty. The other side is what is a community and what is city government, and how do we respond to the needs of neighborhoods and individuals who might be in a bad situation, either because of their own economic limitations or just mistakes they made in the past, but nonetheless need some help.
That is very insightful. I like that dichotomy there because we're confronting that in our area as a result of the Eaton fire.
Yeah.
There, in fact, our guest next month will be talking about this. There's a whole effort to rebuild that area. And one wonders with climate change, which is evident, we're sitting in overly sunny Southern California, where it's going to be 95 degrees today, which is probably the first time since records have been kept in our particular area. And there is that tug and that pull. I like your, some people might say, why would you buy a house there? But other people would say, we're a community, and what does community do to help? So, Cynthia, what about you? I know that there are probably people from Pasadena listening, but you've given great pros in terms of teamwork, in terms of accomplishment, and both you and Phil have the same sensibilities about urban life. But what are the challenges? There are people listening here that are thinking that this is a route to take. So what are the cons? What would you suggest, or what advice would you give somebody who's coming up, especially a female somebody, by the way?
Well, it's not a 9 to 5 job.
Yeah.
Cities run 24/7, and it can be exhausting. You're never going to make everyone happy, as Phil talked about. So don't make that a matrix of success, or you will feel like you're never succeeding. Everyone evaluates you. We talked about the mayor and the council, but that's not the only people that evaluate. There's no way around it. The community, your staff, the council, the consultants, the unions, everyone evaluates you. And I don't know about Phil's experience, but in my experience, not all those evaluations are positive.
Yeah.
But I think I'd say to someone, first of all, that's thinking of going into government, if you think politics is a 4-letter word, don't do it. Politics is the way people in a democracy make decisions. And it's messy and it's not a straight line, but it's the way, when everyone's allowed to have an opinion, you make decisions. And as a leader or a manager in government, you need to understand politics, but try to stay apolitical yourself and not be part of that. But if you think it's a bad thing, then you really probably should look for another job.
Excellent advice. And by the way, we should loop back, because when I first became involved with the city, was a resident for a long period of time, and then started getting involved with commissions and task forces, etc. You had a position that was not city manager. Then you moved into becoming the city manager. Tell us a little bit about that story and why you decided that you would be willing to do it. And again, as the first woman, because I know in my case, I felt like all eyes were on me.
Well, this is a story where I absolutely have to bring Phil into it. Phil was a city manager. I was a project manager in public works, and he selected me to be his public works director, which was a big leap for me, and it took a lot of faith on his part. And then he kept pushing me. He pushed me into assistant city manager. He put me on teams to work on deregulation with the water and power utility manager and the PIO and the planning director. And we were trying to sort through what deregulation would mean in a municipally owned utility. And so bit by bit, I started to expand what I was thinking about beyond just the physical space and the transportation part of a city. And when Phil chose to go to the University of Laverne, I really had some hesitancy in even putting my name into the hat as the interim city manager, but decided at least I would talk to the council about it. And they did give me that position as interim. And I remember the discussion with them. They said, do you want to be the city manager, just the interim for the experience, or do you want to be the city manager? And I said, I don't know. I really don't know. But if we can try this for a few months, maybe both of us can make a decision. And my first 6 months were very good. They included a lot of calls to Phil to ask for advice, but I got through them, and the council and I ultimately decided to sign a contract, and I was there for almost 10 years.
You were indeed, and a pioneer and trailblazer. So you said 2 times. Are you including 2-time city manager? Are you including the interim, or are you including, you came back another time?
I came back. Yeah, Yes, while they were looking and hired Miguel, there was a period of time between Steve Mermel's retirement and Miguel coming on, and so I went back as the city manager. That was about 10 months. But I kid them that they need to do better than having just one person be the first and the second city manager.
So now that
City manager.
And now that the current city manager, Miguel Marquez, has announced that he is leaving, would you be thrice? Would you take it on 3 times and be the interim?
Fortunately, Miguel has said he will stay till they choose someone, and I thank him very, very much for that.
Yeah, I've noticed in my own work, especially in nonprofits, that if, and this is maybe it's not a completely 100% apt simile, but founding executive directors or CEOs on nonprofits who are there for 20, 25 years and then retire, the second person never lasts. It's always a very short term. And I really feel that it's important to have an interim. And I, in fact, have served as a part-time interim several different agencies because you can be the blue meanie and make some of the tough decisions and knowing that you're going to move on. But I always did it part-time because I had to keep the rest of my practice alive. So yeah, that's well said. I'm glad that he is going to stay until his successor is found. So each of you has talked about multiple stakeholders, and I liken it to like a 360 performance evaluation. I love Cynthia's comment, not everybody likes you. And I'm someone who took a lot of them in my own career, and I give them now when I start a coaching assignment, but a 360 is a circle, and it's where the individual assesses himself or herself, then the boss or bosses, then the peers, and then the subordinates. And I learned up close and personal, as well as working with others, that the different stakeholders view your performance very differently, and they often have different expectations. So for me personally, the first time I took one, my boss thought I was great. My peers were suspect, like I had Machiavellian motives, and to distill it, the people that reported to me essentially thought I would climb all over them to get to the top. Of course, I was, hurt. That wasn't what was going on, etc. And kind of perception is reality. So I made a commitment to myself that the last one I took, and I took 8 or 9 of them over, I don't know, 12, 15 years, that I was most concerned about those who reported to me and my peers and less about my boss. And guess what? That's what happened. My peers thought I was very helpful. My subordinates essentially said I was the best boss ever. My boss was not quite so sure because I wasn't always carrying out his directives. But for me, that was success. So that's a long-winded way of saying, how do you grapple with that? How did you grapple with that in government? And then Phil, you talked a little bit about at the University of Laverne, you basically had you had multiple stakeholders, but one you had to please. Right. Okay, so Phil first and then Cynthia.
Well, I did want to pick up Cynthia's comment about her movement into city manager position, but the ability to recognize talent, which I gave a lot of attention to throughout my career, finding smart, talented people who can be department heads or assistant city managers or be in charge of any project. That's really an important part of the formula for success. But reconciling the stresses of an organization, trying to serve your internal organization, as well as the ultimate customer, which would be city residents or the local business community. The incongruities that are wrapped into that, that's part of the complexity of managing in local government. Cynthia mentioned the intensity, and that's certainly true, but solving complex problems. Perhaps my better education to become a city manager was pursuing a law degree, understanding how to dissect complex problems, case studies, and then working towards a solution. And that was part of the formula for addressing a lot of the internal operational issues as well as community issues. Try to put it into and alignment where problems could be solved.
Okay, so thank you, Phil. Cynthia, you also you were the one who mentioned that not everybody likes you. And that's true. If you're looking for people to like you, you don't go into any form of leadership or management. But there are different ways of navigating that or maneuvering through that whole mess, or lack of, it's not a mess, but challenges, shall we say. So in your case, dealing with all those stakeholders, can you give us an example of a success and maybe a failure? I know I'm popping this on you, but there must have been a situation where you had to make a tough decision that maybe you didn't even want to have to carry out. That happens. Or there was a situation where you were able to bring not warring necessarily, but opposing viewpoints together to consensus, that Phil, to me, was really talking about achieving consensus. So I know that was a long-winded question. So whatever you take out of it, go for it.
So no, I think first of all, I just want to comment on what Phil said about the law degree, because I think that the planning degree is somewhat the same in that planning is a process.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just want products, then city manager is probably not a place that will give you much satisfaction. You have to work with the process. And, we always said in Pasadena, the process is just as important as our product. So I really emphasize Phil's emphasis on his law degree and how that helped him solve problems. I don't know if I can think of an exact example, but I will say that, people laugh about the city manager in Pasadena. All you have to do is count to 5. And that is a joke. You're not trying to just count to 5. But in a sense, when you're sitting there Monday night, listening to the council, grappling with a problem, pulling it apart, listening to the public, they have a staff recommendation, they have public recommendation, they have public comment. You are trying to find a thread that connects at least 5 of them. That's your job right there. Monday night, your job is not to say, well, I'm done, sign the report. You work really hard at that council meeting, listening really, really intensely to what everybody's saying. You're trying to find what they agree on, not solve what they don't agree on. Because if you find the thread and what they agree on, just the way you do in a committee meeting, what do we first agree on? And then when we get that core, how much beyond that can we go? And that is really what I thought the job was Monday night. So it wasn't counting to 5, but finding 5 that agreed on something, and hopefully 6, 7, and even 8 when we added the mayor. And then seeing beyond that, if we could come to consensus with more things, or if we only would get so far in our decision making. And listen to me, I'm saying our decision making because I felt like I needed to be part of helping them make a decision, not watching them make a decision.
Wow, that's fascinating, and that's akin to, in my practice, in the leadership space, there's kind of this divergent view of conflict resolution or conflict management, and I'm an advocate of conflict management. I mean, things can be resolved if it's like, Cynthia and Phil both want the same vacation date, and the policy says first person who asks gets the date. That's resolved. But most issues, especially in today's very turbulent times and very political times, differences are based upon values and different perspectives and heritage and race and ethnicity and history, etc. So to me, it's managing to the win-win, which is what I'm hearing you say in different words. So that's really fascinating. I never thought about it that way. So you're looking for the thread among the 5. What do we agree on? And then how can we expand it? So
I'm just going to give another example.
Jump in, Phil.
My experience with deregulation of electricity. And back in the 90s, there was a big push across the country for deregulation. And state of California passed a law that said that electricity would be an open market, which means that anybody that provided electricity could compete and perform services anywhere, which meant that City of Pasadena, which had its own electrical department, electricity, um, was about to be thrown into a more open marketplace.
Hmm.
So the Department of Water and Power, power being the electrical part, had to become market competitive. And market competitive, which means internal systems, internal management, as well as quality of service and communication with customers. And so um, I discussed it with City Council. City Council didn't have a consensus on it, but that was kind of in the management realm. I should do something about it. So I put a big effort with Cynthia in the lead to reposition the city's power department to be able to compete in the marketplace. And a lot of transformation happened, but we spent a lot of money doing that, a lot of time, a lot of effort. Um, and ultimately, the state changed its mind. It rescinded deregulation of electricity. And so the whole effort wasn't a waste, but it was really a sidetrack, a disruption, um, and perhaps was premature until the issue is settled. So it's kind of an example of um, leading too soon
Hmm.
before the problem
Interesting.
is ripe, trying to be ahead of the curve. But when the curve changes direction, it has a rebound that uh, doesn't always look so good as to whether you're a good manager or not.
But, I'm not sure that's leading too soon. That's a little bit, one only has to think about what's going on in the world right now. I think it's important to anticipate what could happen. And I chuckle because I'm a former utility officer.
Mhm.
And so I saw it from another perspective. But as I recall, at the time, city council member, the late great Sid Tyler, really kind of was very
Oh, yeah.
staunch proponent to keeping Pasadena Water and Power strong, and that there were some others who thought, well, maybe we'll just divest ourselves of it. And as a resident, I can say I am so glad that the city made that decision. And you have the wealth of knowledge from having done the little war game. Okay,
But
I'm going
it
to
just
ask.
became a better operation. But let me just say that
Sure.
some of my peers, other cities and counties that were in the electricity business, one in particular said, I'm going to wait until city council tells me to do it. Um, and so that was a counter pressure in my mind as to whether I was extending too far over the tips of my skis.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Personally, I think you did the right thing, but you have to, I don't know if being in the city is a risk adverse environment, but I have found in terms of leading, I was always a risk taker, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but you
Yeah.
always learn, and you always take those lessons and move forward. So, I didn't know that part of the story, so I'm happy to hear it, and I'm glad you led the way you did. So speaking of that, Phil, what would you say are the 3 to 5 top leadership skills? And then I'm going to ask Cynthia to add to the list, or maybe she has a different list.
Well, for me, I guess the primary one is trust,
Mhm.
integrity, um, being as truthful as possible with everybody you deal with, and honest. And I say as possible because sometimes complete candor is not appropriate. Sometimes one council member tells me one thing that's different than the other council member. I can't be open about that sort of information. But those kind of relationships, and relationships not only with city council, department heads, staff, and people in the community. That I spend a lot of time in the community. It's interesting that I would guess 50% of my time was internal, was city council, but the other 50% was in the community and community groups and dealing with explaining deregulation or any other community issue. I was city manager uh, when we had the crisis in 1992, 1993, um, um, with the violence in the community, civil
Mm,
disturbance.
Yeah.
And that was very disruptive. But having a good relationship through honesty and candor was the most important. And hard work, doing my homework, listening to people. And I've found that later on, after I left the city, that I had a tendency to be collaborative, the servant leadership that we were all taught back in the 80s and 90s. That when I was put in a position of more independence, that habit of waiting to hear from a large group of people sometimes delayed me from taking action that needed to be done. But those are the important issues that struck me.
Interesting. But constant learning, as they
Yes,
say,
that's right.
lifelong
That's
learning.
right.
Cynthia, what about you? What would you add to the list, or do you have any, are you at odds with Phil in any way?
I'm not at odds at all, and I just will emphasize the trustworthiness. If you ever get caught in a lie,
Mm,
you will never regain your leadership role, or people will not have faith in you. Active listening, I think, is really important. I got into the habit over time of when I have a new council member or a new staff person, I would ask them why. Why did you run for election? Why do you want to be on city council? Why did you want to come to Pasadena? And
mhm,
hearing what their priorities are and where their mindset was, I think helped in bringing people together when it became a hot issue and people needed to maybe cool off and think about why they were there again.
mhm.
And the other thing I would add is don't be afraid to make a decision. I see so many people get stymied, and I don't have all the data. I don't know all the things. There's stuff I'm
Yeah.
still waiting for. You'll never have all the data, and you'll never move forward if you don't make a decision. And you know what? You're going to make some really bad ones. And when you do, admit you did and make a new one.
Yeah.
Uh, correct it to the extent you can. But I do see people as they move into leadership being so afraid to to make a decision and to move forward. And you just got to jump in the deep end.
That reminds me, I'm
I was
probably
going
going
to piggyback on Cynthia's answer that's truly the case, and particularly in city management where it's intense, busy, issues coming at you all the time, big ones and little ones. Um, and I've said before about a comparison between going from city management into a private nonprofit university, where a city manager felt like standing in the batting cage and the balls were coming at 100 miles per hour, and I'm swinging, hitting some, and some are flyouts, and some are home runs, and but they're coming all the time. When I went to the university, it was standing in the batting cage, and I could keep my feet settled and get the bat up poised to swing, and the ball would come at 70 miles an hour, and I could hit it, and then wait for the next one. So the pace, the intensity of decisions, issues was very different in a private nonprofit.
Interesting. I think when Cynthia mentioned her comment, it reminded me, and I might be botching this, the Pareto principle, 85-15, where it
Mhm.
takes 15% of the time to get to 85% of the answer, and to get to 100%, that last 15%, it takes 85% of your time. I was always a Pareto principle person. I was always happy going with 85% in an environment that Phil's talking about where decisions are coming at you all the time. And I think it takes a certain amount of self-confidence. And I sometimes think about, I'm going through my house and trying to rid myself of stuff. I'm finding, having lived here for 30 years, finding documents and things that I saved. And I always had a sense of self-confidence, and I'm not really even sure where it came from. I don't know, the old environment versus biology. You have more than one child and you go, oh, it's biology. But I think it takes a certain confidence and ability to stand up and to, as Cynthia said, we all make mistakes. Admit it. I'm sorry and move
That's
on.
right.
And to me, it's an unvarnished apology when you say, I'm sorry, but with a reason, it sounds, an explanation becomes an excuse. So it's just, I'm sorry, and moving on. Wow. So believe it or not,
And you do the best you can, but you have
that's
to
right.
take the next step forward. And there's
Yeah.
you can't back up and whine. It's just you learn from your mistakes, you're honest with people, and you keep on going.
Yeah. I always visualize it kind of like, those little kid toys, those little cars that go into the wall, then they turn around and they go someplace else. That life is sometimes like that as well.
Yeah.
We are, believe it or not, fastly coming to the end of this conversation, but we do have a few minutes. So I'm sure I haven't asked each of you something that you would like to share about leadership, whether it's in the government, outside of the government, but something you'd like to impart. So, Cynthia, why don't you go first, and then Phil can conclude, and we will move on.
So, actually, your questions have been quite comprehensive. So
Okay.
we've covered a lot of territory, and I hope people find it useful. One way to decide whether or not you want to be part of a leadership, if you're struggling or if you want to move into management, is start volunteering. You will find very quickly in a group whether you sit in the back of the room or you want to be in the front of the room, whether you put your hand up or you're afraid to put your hand up. And in Pasadena, that's pretty easy to do because there are just a few nonprofit organizations that are looking for volunteers. And so I would just say to people, if you're thinking, do I want to apply for that next job where I start to manage people and so on, do some volunteering. You'll know who you are pretty soon.
Well, excellent advice. And we're all chuckling for those who are not from Pasadena. Pasadena has well over 200 nonprofits. It's second only to Washington, D.C., that has more nonprofits. And I would suspect probably it's not just in this country, it's probably worldwide. So we are blessed because of the history that is deep with a lot of different religions that spawned a lot of the nonprofits. But each of the three of us has served on many, shall we say. So, Phil, what would you add to the list? Or what haven't I asked you that you would like to share? And it could include the housing stuff that you're working on.
Well, certainly in affordable housing, I'm involved with affordable housing in part because of the experience of working in the local government, the public sector. It's fulfilling. And of course, everybody wants to feel fulfilled about the work they do through their life and their career and the impact it has on society. But it's truly directly beneficial, and the satisfaction that comes from that, while also recognizing that I'm still involved because I care about the state of the world and care about the state of our community and care about social justice. And those are values that have followed me throughout my entire career. Those are values that may not suit somebody that would be more comfortable in private business, for example, but it certainly applies for most nonprofits and government work, particularly local government work, where you have that face-to-face contact with the people that you serve.
Well, one of the things and that you said that has stuck with me, we have an issue where we are, quote unquote, underhoused, the current term. And Phil said one day to a group of us, and especially people like me who are living in these big old houses in Pasadena, I mean, you essentially said that if all the extra rooms were used as housing, we could kind of eliminate some of the problems that we have in terms of those being underhoused, which I think is a unique perspective. I don't think it's going to gain traction, but when you think about it's a stark reality if you think about it that way. But it's also caused me to realize that it's time to downsize, which is why I'm going through all this stuff here and finding things that were, I thought, lost to the universe.
And well, it also relates to building a sense of community that we all share this city together. We need to care for one another. And then you could broaden that into the county and the state and the country. But the value of caring for your fellow human being is a driving force in the work that Cynthia did and does, and I do, and many people in the public sector.
And we Ooh, we only have 1 minute, but one thing that's clear is, Phil, you mentored Cynthia. You probably had mentors. I know I had mentors along the way as well, and that's critical. And for those of us who have been leaders, continue to be leaders, we mentor others as well. So, as we get ready to close this edition of Wise Women and Good Men, Leaders on Leadership, I want to thank Cynthia and Phil. For those who are unable to be on LinkedIn Live, this conversation will be uploaded later in the day to YouTube, and also my website, which is www.dianapetersonmore.com, no hyphen, has all of the past episodes, and it will have this episode. So Cynthia and Phil are also on LinkedIn. So if somebody's interested in reaching out, you can probably send them a message. And I would say next month, we are honored to have Jennifer Duval, who was CEO of the Pasadena Community Foundation, which is this huge foundation that under her tenure, she actually grew the foundation from 16 million to over 200 million. She was going to retire, and now she's actually working on Eaton Fire victims and really helping with housing there. So I would thank you all, and I look forward to an ongoing relationship. And please tune in next month, April 21st at 10 a.m. Pacific. So thank you, Phil. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you,
wonderful conversation. It could have gone on for hours, but people aren't interested in listening to anything for hours these days. So thank you. Have a great day, and happy St. Patrick's Day, one and all.
Right. Bye.
Bye.